What if what we are witnessing right now is no longer just a natural disaster, but signs that were written thousands of years ago? In recent years, especially from 2023 to 2025, the United States has experienced a pattern of extreme events that no longer behave like isolated incidents. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the year 2023 alone recorded 28 separate climate disasters, each causing more than $1 billion in damage. This is not only a record-breaking number, but also a signal that the scale and frequency of these events are accelerating beyond historical norms. What makes this situation even more striking is not simply the number of disasters, but the way they are unfolding simultaneously across different regions. These are not events spaced out over years or confined to specific climates. They are occurring within the same time window across the East Coast, the West Coast, the South, and the Midwest, affecting millions of people at once, and creating a sense that something larger is unfolding beneath the surface of what we can easily explain. A single winter storm can now stretch from Florida, a state known for its warm and humid climate, all the way to Massachusetts, covering thousands of miles within one continuous atmospheric system. Areas that rarely experience freezing temperatures are suddenly dealing with ice, snow, and infrastructure failure. At the same time, on the opposite side of the country, California's coastline is being battered by powerful waves that are strong enough to erode cliffs, damage highways, and threaten entire communities. While this is happening, in the Midwest, the sky itself begins to display unusual colors. And in the Central Plains, rare tornado formations appear with movements that seem almost synchronized rather than chaotic. These events are not connected geographically, yet they are connected in timing. And that timing is what demands closer attention. From a scientific perspective, there are explanations for each of these phenomena. Climate scientists point to the destabilization of the jet stream, a fast-flowing air current that normally helps regulate weather patterns across the northern hemisphere. When this system weakens or shifts, it allows cold Arctic air to move further south than usual, while also trapping warm air in regions that are not prepared for it. This creates extreme contrasts that fuel stronger storms, more intense precipitation, and unpredictable weather behavior. In addition to this, rising global temperatures contribute to increased ocean energy, which amplifies storm systems and accelerates coastal erosion. Atmospheric pressure systems are also becoming less stable, leading to unusual storm tracks and prolonged weather events that linger longer than expected. However, while science can explain mechanisms, it does not fully address the pattern. Each explanation works when applied to a single event. But when multiple rare events begin to occur at the same time, across unrelated systems, the conversation shifts. It is no longer just about how something happens, but why so many things are happening together. Patterns matter because they reveal relationships that are not obvious when events are viewed in isolation. When storms intensify at the same time, coastlines collapse. When unusual atmospheric visuals appear alongside structural changes in the land, and when these events cluster within a narrow time frame, the pattern itself becomes the central issue. This is where the comparison to Scripture becomes relevant, not as a replacement for scientific understanding, but as a framework that has long described periods of convergence. In Matthew 24:7, there is a clear statement that there will be disturbances across multiple regions at the same time, not as isolated disasters, but as a collective unfolding. The emphasis in that passage is not on a single catastrophic event, but on the simultaneity of disruptions. This distinction is important because it aligns closely with what is being observed today. The events themselves are not entirely unprecedented, but their coordination in time is what makes them unusual. When different systems begin to react at once, It suggests that they may be responding to a shared, underlying pressure. In natural science, systems that are connected through feedback loops can reach a tipping point where changes in one area trigger reactions in another. For example, warming oceans can influence atmospheric circulation, which in turn affects storm intensity and distribution. Land conditions, such as soil saturation and geological stress, can also interact with these atmospheric changes, creating compound effects. But even within this framework, the speed and scale of recent developments raise questions. Feedback systems typically evolve gradually. Yet what is being observed appears to be accelerating. The human experience of these changes adds another layer of significance. For residents living through these events, the impact is not abstract. Power outages, disrupted supply chains, damaged infrastructure, and forced evacuations create a direct confrontation with instability. What was once considered reliable begins to feel uncertain. Seasons no longer behave as expected, and regional identities tied to climate start to lose their meaning. When Florida experiences freezing temperatures and California faces repeated coastal collapse, the concept of predictable geography begins to break down. This breakdown of predictability is critical because human systems are built on the assumption of stability. Cities are designed based on historical weather patterns. Infrastructure is engineered with certain expectations in mind. When those expectations are no longer valid, the systems themselves become vulnerable. The result is not just physical damage, but a psychological shift. People begin to question whether the environment they depend on is still consistent. This uncertainty creates a sense of unease that goes beyond any single event. In biblical context, moments of widespread disruption are often described as times when established order is challenged. The idea is not that nature becomes chaotic without reason, but that it reflects a transition. The language used in Scripture often points to awakening rather than destruction, suggesting that these moments are meant to draw attention. When multiple forms of disruption occur at once, they create a pattern that is difficult to ignore. This does not require abandoning scientific explanations, but it does invite a broader perspective on meaning and timing. Another important aspect to consider is repetition. Many of these events are not happening for the first time, but they are happening more frequently. Patterns that were once considered rare are becoming more common. For example, extreme cold events reaching southern states have occurred multiple times in recent years. Coastal erosion in California has been documented over decades, but the rate is increasing. Large-scale storms affecting multiple regions simultaneously are becoming more frequent. Repetition transforms anomalies into trends, and trends indicate direction. When trends point toward increasing instability, it suggests that systems are moving away from equilibrium. In physics and environmental science, systems under stress often exhibit warning signs before reaching a critical threshold. These signs can include increased variability, unexpected behavior, and the breakdown of previously stable patterns. The clustering of extreme events may represent such a warning phase. If this is the case, then what is being observed now is not the final outcome, but an early stage of a larger shift. This possibility leads back to the central question. If these events are connected, what is driving the connection? Is it purely environmental, driven by measurable factors such as temperature, pressure, and energy distribution? Or is there a deeper layer that involves timing and sequence in a way that aligns with historical descriptions of transitional periods? The answer may not be immediately clear, but the question itself is important because it changes how the situation is approached. Instead of viewing each event as an isolated problem to be solved, the focus shifts to understanding the pattern as a whole. This requires attention, not just to data, but to timing, repetition, and interaction between systems. It also requires acknowledging that not all patterns are immediately understood. Throughout history, there have been moments when patterns were recognized before their causes were fully explained. In such cases, observation becomes the first step toward understanding. At this point, what stands out is not just the intensity of individual events, but their coordination. Storms, temperature shifts, coastal changes, and atmospheric anomalies are all occurring within overlapping timeframes. This coordination creates a narrative that builds rather than resets. Each new event adds to the pattern instead of replacing it. Over time, this accumulation makes it increasingly difficult to dismiss the situation as coincidence. The implications of this pattern are significant. If the environment is entering a phase of increased instability, then preparation becomes essential. Preparation, in this context, does not necessarily mean predicting specific events, but recognizing that change is occurring and adapting accordingly. It also means paying attention to signals rather than ignoring them. In both scientific and biblical frameworks, signals serve a purpose. They indicate that conditions are shifting and that awareness is necessary. As these simultaneous disruptions across the nation begin to establish a clear pattern, one of the most striking developments emerges from a place where such conditions were once considered almost impossible. In recent years, Arctic air has not remained confined to the northernmost regions of the United States, but has instead pushed far deeper into the southern states with increasing frequency and intensity. According to the Washington Post, during the 2024 cold wave, temperatures in parts of Texas dropped below -10 degrees Celsius, a level rarely observed in modern recorded history. At the same time, Florida, widely known for its subtropical climate, experienced localized freezing conditions that disrupted agriculture, infrastructure, and daily life. These are not isolated anomalies, but repeated intrusions that are beginning to redefine expectations about regional climate behavior. The primary scientific explanation for this phenomenon is the destabilization of the polar vortex, a large mass of cold air that typically circulates around the Arctic. Under normal conditions, this system is contained by strong atmospheric currents. But when those currents weaken or shift, the cold air can break away and move southward. This movement allows freezing temperatures to reach areas that are not designed to handle them, creating widespread disruption. Researchers have also noted that these disruptions are becoming more frequent over the past decade, suggesting that the underlying systems that once maintained balance are no longer as stable as they were in the past. This shift carries consequences that extend beyond temperature readings. It challenges the fundamental assumption that geography determines climate in a predictable way. Regions once considered safe from extreme cold are now exposed to it, forcing communities to confront conditions they were never prepared for. Infrastructure built for warm weather begins to fail under freezing stress. Power grids become overloaded, transportation systems slow or shut down, and essential services are strained. These are not temporary inconveniences, but structural challenges that reveal how dependent modern society is on predictable environmental patterns. The deeper issue is not simply that it is becoming colder in unexpected places, but that the concept of predictability itself is being eroded. When people can no longer rely on historical patterns to anticipate future conditions, the sense of control begins to weaken. Planning becomes more difficult, and confidence in stability diminishes. This creates a psychological shift that mirrors the physical changes taking place. People begin to ask not just what is happening, but whether the systems they depend on can still be trusted. In Ecclesiastes 3:1, the Bible states that there is a season for everything, emphasizing the idea that the natural world operates within an established order. This concept of order is central because it provides a framework for understanding time change, and expectation. When seasons begin to overlap or behave unpredictably, it suggests a disruption in that order. This does not require a symbolic interpretation to be meaningful. The physical reality itself reflects a breakdown in structure. However, within a biblical context, such disruptions are often associated with moments of transition, where established patterns give way to new conditions. What makes the current situation particularly significant is the combination of frequency and scale. Occasional cold events in southern regions have occurred in the past, but the increasing regularity of these events indicates a trend rather than an exception. Trends signal direction, and direction implies movement toward a new state of equilibrium. The question is not whether these changes are happening, but where they are leading. If the systems that once defined climate boundaries are weakening, then the boundaries themselves are becoming less reliable. This realization leads directly into another phenomenon that further challenges expectations, not through temperature, but through visual transformation. During a major snowstorm in Iowa, observers reported that the entire sky shifted into shades of pink and purple, creating an environment that felt both unfamiliar and disorienting. According to National Weather Service, this effect is caused by the refraction of sunlight as it passes through ice crystals in the atmosphere at specific angles. The conditions required for this to occur are highly precise, involving the density of cloud cover, the position of the sun, and the concentration of ice particles. While the physics behind the phenomenon is understood, the rarity of the exact combination of conditions makes such events uncommon. What distinguishes this event is not only its cause, but its scale. The color shift did not occur in a limited area, but extended across the entire sky, altering the visual environment completely. This widespread transformation affected perception in a direct and immediate way. Drivers reported difficulty judging distance and movement because familiar visual cues were no longer reliable. Buildings and landscapes appeared different, creating a sense of disorientation that went beyond normal weather conditions. The environment itself seemed to change character, even though the physical structures remained the same. This type of experience has a measurable psychological impact. Humans rely heavily on visual consistency to interpret their surroundings. When that consistency is disrupted, it creates a sense of uncertainty that is difficult to ignore. Many individuals who witnessed the event described a combination of awe and unease. The colors were striking and visually compelling, yet they also carried an unfamiliar quality that made the experience feel significant. This reaction is not based on interpretation, but on direct sensory input. When the sky changes in a way that is outside normal experience, it draws attention immediately. In Luke 21:25, the Bible refers to signs in the sun, moon, and stars, indicating that changes in the sky can serve as markers of significant moments. These signs are not necessarily destructive, but are meant to be noticed. The emphasis is on visibility and recognition rather than fear. When applied to the present situation, the relevance lies in the fact that the sky, one of the most stable and consistent elements of the natural world, is exhibiting behavior that captures attention in a powerful way. From a scientific standpoint, the explanation remains within the realm of optics and atmospheric conditions. However, the timing and context of such events contribute to their significance. When unusual visual phenomena occur alongside other forms of disruption, they become part of a larger pattern. Each event adds to the overall picture, reinforcing the sense that multiple systems are changing simultaneously. The sky, the land, and the climate are all displaying variations that challenge previous assumptions. The critical point is not whether each individual event can be explained, but how these events relate to one another. The color shift in the sky is not dangerous in itself, but it is indicative of conditions that are outside the norm. When these conditions appear during a period already marked by extreme weather and environmental instability, they contribute to a broader narrative. This narrative is defined by convergence, where different forms of change occur within the same time frame. As this pattern continues to develop, it becomes increasingly difficult to separate perception from observation. The physical changes are measurable, but the way they are experienced adds another dimension. People are not only witnessing events, but reacting to them in ways that reflect a deeper sense of awareness. This awareness does not require a specific interpretation to be valid. It simply acknowledges that something is different. The progression from shifting climate boundaries to altered visual environments illustrates a consistent theme. Systems that were once stable are becoming variable. Boundaries that were once clear are becoming blurred. This applies not only to temperature and geography, but also to perception and expectation. Each new development builds on the previous one, creating a sequence that is both logical and continuous. At this stage, the pattern is no longer subtle. It is visible in data, in experience, and in the consistency of change across different domains. The cold reaching the south demonstrates a breakdown in climatic boundaries. The changing sky reveals variability in atmospheric conditions. Together, they form a coherent progression that points toward a broader transformation. The question that naturally follows is not whether these events are connected, but what their connection ultimately signifies. As the atmosphere continues to display instability, and the sky itself begins to behave in unexpected ways, the focus naturally shifts from what is happening above to what is happening at ground level. Along the western edge of the United States, the coastline of California is undergoing a transformation that is both measurable and deeply concerning. According to U.S. Geological Survey, approximately 70% of California's coastline is currently experiencing erosion, with some areas losing between 0.3 and 1 meter of land each year. This is not a sudden collapse that draws immediate attention through a single dramatic event. Instead, it is a gradual but persistent process that accumulates over time, weakening structures, altering landscapes, and placing entire communities at increasing risk. The causes of this erosion are well documented. Rising sea levels contribute to higher baseline water positions, allowing waves to reach further inland. At the same time, storm systems have become more intense, generating waves with greater energy that strike the coastline with increased force. In addition to these factors, land subsidence plays a critical role. Portions of the coastline are slowly sinking, reducing their elevation relative to sea level and making them more vulnerable to erosion. Each of these factors can be studied individually, and each has a scientific explanation. However, their combined effect creates a situation where the rate of change exceeds the ability of natural and human systems to adapt. What makes this process particularly significant is its subtlety. Unlike earthquakes or sudden landslides, erosion does not always produce immediate, dramatic signs. It can progress unnoticed until a threshold is reached, at which point the consequences become visible and irreversible. Roads that once ran safely along cliffs begin to crack and shift. Homes that were built with a margin of safety find themselves dangerously close to the edge. Protective structures such as seawalls and barriers lose their effectiveness as the ground beneath them changes. By the time these effects are fully recognized, the underlying process has already advanced beyond easy correction. This gradual weakening of the coastline introduces a critical question about stability. Human development relies on the assumption that the ground beneath structures is reliable. When that assumption is no longer valid, the entire system of planning and construction is challenged. Repairing damage becomes more complex because the foundation itself is no longer secure. Engineers can rebuild roads and reinforce cliffs, but if the land continues to erode or subside, These solutions become temporary measures rather than permanent fixes. In Matthew 7:26-27, the Bible describes a house built on sand that collapses when storms arrive because its foundation is not stable. This passage is often understood as a metaphor, but it also reflects a physical reality that is now being observed in a literal sense. When the ground shifts, structures fail. The principle is straightforward and does not require interpretation. Stability depends on a reliable foundation, and when that foundation changes, the outcome is predictable. The connection between this principle and current events lies in the alignment between description and observation. The erosion of California's coastline demonstrates how a system can appear stable while gradually losing its integrity. The visible collapse is only the final stage of a process that has been developing over time. This progression emphasizes the importance of recognizing early signs rather than waiting for obvious failure. As this understanding develops, attention naturally moves from structural changes in the land to phenomena that involve both physical and sensory experience. During a powerful storm system in the Central Plains, observers reported hearing a sound that did not match any familiar category. It was described as a deep, metallic tone resembling a trumpet, sustained over a period of time rather than occurring as a brief, sharp noise like thunder. Multiple recordings captured this sound from different locations using doorbell cameras, security systems, and mobile devices. This consistency across independent sources suggests that the sound was not the result of equipment malfunction or localized interference. Initial analyses referenced by CNN indicate that the sound does not align with known atmospheric phenomena. It does not match the frequency patterns of thunder, nor does it correspond to aircraft noise, industrial activity, or seismic events. The inability to categorize the sound within existing frameworks makes it notable. In scientific investigation, anomalies are significant because they highlight gaps in understanding. When a phenomenon cannot be easily explained, it requires further observation and analysis. What distinguishes this event is not only the sound itself, but its context. It occurred during a storm, a setting where certain types of noise are expected. Wind, rain, and thunder create a familiar acoustic environment. The introduction of a sustained tonal sound within this environment stands out immediately because it does not fit within the expected range. Observers recognized this difference instinctively, which prompted them to record and document the event. In 1 Thessalonians 4:16, the Bible references the sound of a trumpet as a signal associated with a significant moment. This description is clear and direct, focusing on the auditory aspect rather than visual imagery. While it is not possible to establish a direct connection between the recorded sound and this passage, the similarity in description has led many to consider the possibility of symbolic alignment. The relevance here is not based on assumption, but on the observable overlap between a described signal and an experienced phenomenon. The presence of sound adds a new dimension to the pattern that has been developing. Up to this point, changes have been primarily visual or physical, involving temperature, landscape, and atmospheric appearance. The introduction of an auditory element expands the range of experience, engaging another sense and reinforcing the perception that multiple systems are involved. When a phenomenon can be both seen and heard, it becomes more difficult to ignore. This progression from visual to auditory signals reflects a consistent expansion of complexity. Each new development builds on the previous ones, adding layers rather than replacing them. The coastline erosion demonstrates physical instability. The unusual sky colors reveal atmospheric variation. The unexplained sound introduces an element that cannot yet be categorized. Together, these elements form a sequence that is both logical and continuous. The key factor in this sequence is consistency. Each event contributes to a broader pattern of change that is occurring across different domains. The land, the atmosphere, and now the acoustic environment are all displaying variations that challenge established expectations. This does not imply a single cause, but it does indicate that multiple systems are undergoing change at the same time. As the pattern of environmental change continues to expand from land and atmosphere into increasingly complex forms, attention shifts toward living systems and how they respond under conditions that are not immediately visible to human perception. One of the most unusual observations comes from a lake in Illinois, where witnesses reported fish forming a vertical column in the water, maintaining alignment as a single coordinated structure rather than dispersing in typical horizontal schools. This behavior is highly irregular when compared to known patterns of aquatic movement. According to experts interviewed by National Geographic, fish are extremely sensitive to environmental changes such as pressure shifts, temperature variation, oxygen levels, and the presence of predators. Under normal circumstances, their movements reflect clear responses to these factors. However, in this case, no such triggers were identified. Water quality tests conducted in response to the event showed no signs of chemical contamination, no abnormal temperature fluctuations, and no depletion of oxygen that could force fish into unusual formations. There were also no significant currents or disturbances in the water that would physically push the fish into a vertical arrangement. Sonar and imaging equipment confirmed that the structure was not random. The fish were moving in coordination, maintaining a defined shape as they shifted position within the lake. This indicates a form of collective behavior that is organized rather than reactive. In biological systems, coordinated movement is often associated with survival strategies. Fish may form tight groups to reduce the risk of predation, or they may align with currents to conserve energy. These behaviors are well documented and can be explained through evolutionary principles. However, the vertical alignment observed in this instance does not correspond to any known survival mechanism. It does not provide an obvious advantage in terms of defense or efficiency. This absence of a clear purpose is what makes the phenomenon difficult to interpret within existing frameworks. The possibility that remains is that the fish are responding to a stimulus that is not currently measurable. In environmental science, there are known cases where animals react to subtle changes that humans cannot detect directly. For example, certain species can sense vibrations, electromagnetic variations, or pressure changes that precede geological events. These sensitivities allow them to respond earlier than human observers, creating the impression that they are reacting without cause, when, in fact, the cause is simply beyond current measurement capabilities. This raises a broader question about perception and limitation. Human understanding of the environment is based on instruments and models that translate physical conditions into data. While these tools are highly advanced, they are not comprehensive. There may be factors influencing behavior that have not yet been identified or quantified. When organisms respond in coordinated ways without visible triggers, it suggests that there are layers of interaction within the environment that are not fully understood. In Romans 8:22, the Bible states that creation itself is in a state of tension, often interpreted as a form of collective response to underlying conditions. This description aligns with the idea that the natural world can react as a system rather than as isolated components. The significance of this alignment lies not in interpretation, but in observation. The behavior of the fish demonstrates coordination across individuals, forming a unified structure that acts as a single entity. This type of behavior reflects system-level interaction rather than individual reaction. What makes this event particularly important is its place within the larger pattern that has been developing. Earlier observations have shown changes in climate boundaries, atmospheric conditions, land stability, and acoustic phenomena. Each of these involves different aspects of the environment. The inclusion of biological response adds another dimension, indicating that living systems are also participating in this broader shift. This participation is not random but structured, suggesting that the changes affecting physical systems are also influencing biological ones. The transition from physical to biological indicators marks an important stage in understanding the scope of change. Physical systems such as weather and geology operate according to measurable forces. Biological systems, while influenced by those forces, also incorporate behavior and adaptation. When behavior changes in ways that cannot be easily explained, it highlights the interaction between known variables and unknown influences. This interaction is where new insights often emerge. Another factor to consider is timing. The appearance of this behavior during a period already marked by multiple unusual events reinforces the idea of convergence. If the fish formation had occurred in isolation, it might be treated as an anomaly specific to that location. However, when it appears alongside other forms of disruption, it becomes part of a sequence. Sequences provide context, and context allows patterns to be recognized. The consistency of coordination observed in the fish formation also suggests that the stimulus, whatever it may be, is stable enough to maintain organized behavior over time. Random disturbances typically produce chaotic responses. In contrast, sustained coordination implies a continuous or repeating influence. This distinction is important because it indicates that the phenomenon is not a brief reaction, but a maintained state. From a systems perspective, this behavior can be viewed as an indicator. Indicators are observable changes that point to underlying conditions. In environmental monitoring, indicators are used to detect shifts before they become fully apparent. For example, changes in animal behavior can precede weather events or geological activity. The vertical alignment of fish may serve as such an indicator, signaling that conditions within the environment are changing in ways that are not yet fully visible. This possibility leads to a practical consideration. If biological systems are responding to changes before those changes are detected through standard measurements, then observing these responses becomes a valuable source of information. It does not replace scientific analysis, but it complements it by providing early signals. Recognizing these signals requires attention and documentation, as well as an openness to investigating phenomena that do not fit existing models. The broader implication is that the environment operates as an interconnected system. Changes in one domain can influence others, creating feedback loops that amplify or modify behavior. The fish formation represents a point where biological response intersects with environmental change. Understanding this intersection requires integrating data from multiple sources, including physical measurements and behavioral observations. As this integration develops, the pattern becomes more comprehensive. The earlier focus on atmospheric and geological changes expands to include living systems, creating a more complete picture of how different components of the environment are interacting. This picture is still evolving, and not all elements are fully understood. However, the presence of coordinated biological behavior adds a layer of complexity that cannot be ignored. The progression from climate anomalies to atmospheric variations, from land instability to unexplained sound, and now to biological coordination, forms a sequence that is both logical and cumulative. Each stage introduces new information while reinforcing the overall pattern. The fish formation does not stand alone. It connects to the broader context of simultaneous changes occurring across different systems. At this point, the question is not whether these events are happening, but how they relate to one another. The evidence shows that multiple systems are changing at the same time, and that these changes are affecting both physical and biological domains. The challenge lies in understanding the connections between these domains and identifying the factors that drive them. This requires continued observation, careful analysis, and a willingness to consider possibilities that extend beyond current assumptions. The behavior of the fish provides a clear example of how new information can emerge from unexpected sources. It demonstrates that even well-studied systems can exhibit behavior that is not immediately explainable, and that such behavior can offer valuable insights into the state of the environment. As the pattern continues to develop, each new observation contributes to a deeper understanding of the changes taking place. The fish formation is one piece of this larger picture, highlighting the role of biological systems in reflecting environmental conditions. It reinforces the idea that the environment is not composed of isolated parts, but of interconnected systems that respond together. This understanding brings the focus back to the central theme of convergence. Multiple forms of change are occurring within the same time frame across different domains and with increasing consistency. The inclusion of biological response confirms that this convergence extends beyond physical processes, encompassing the behavior of living organisms as well. The significance of this lies in the completeness of the pattern, which continues to grow as new observations are added. As the sequence of environmental and biological changes continues to unfold with increasing clarity, attention turns to another category of events that does not originate in the sky, the land surface, or living systems, but from beneath the ground itself. In several recent discoveries, objects and structures that had remained hidden for extended periods have begun to surface, raising questions not only about their origin, but also about their timing. Reports of an ancient stone altar bearing Hebrew inscriptions, along with the discovery of a sealed underground chamber containing preserved scrolls, present a different type of phenomenon. These are not natural events driven by weather or geological pressure alone. They involve human history, intention, and preservation across time. What makes them significant within the current pattern is not simply that they were found, but that they were found during a period already marked by widespread environmental disruption. Archaeological discoveries are not uncommon, and they often occur as a result of planned excavation or construction activity. However, the context in which these particular findings emerged adds an additional layer of interest. The altar, identified as having characteristics consistent with early Hebrew design, was uncovered in a region where such artifacts are not typically expected. The underground chamber, carefully constructed and sealed, contained scrolls arranged in a manner that suggests deliberate preservation rather than casual storage. At the center of this chamber, a skeletal figure was found, positioned in a way that indicates intentional guardianship of the contents. These details point to a purposeful act of concealment, carried out with the expectation that the materials would remain hidden for a long time. The question that arises from these observations is straightforward. Why were these objects preserved, and why are they appearing now? In Daniel 12:4, there is a statement that certain words are sealed until a specific time. This concept introduces the idea that information can be intentionally hidden with the expectation that it will be revealed at an appropriate moment. The relevance of this idea in the current context lies in the alignment between description and occurrence. Objects that were clearly meant to remain concealed have become visible during a period when multiple other forms of change are also taking place. From a scientific perspective, the discovery of buried structures can be explained by standard processes such as erosion, shifting soil, or human activity that exposes previously hidden layers. These explanations account for the mechanism of discovery, but they do not address the broader pattern of timing. When such discoveries occur independently, they are treated as isolated events within the field of archaeology. When they occur alongside widespread environmental and biological anomalies, they become part of a larger sequence that invites comparison and analysis. The presence of preserved texts adds another dimension to this situation. Written material carries information that can be studied, translated, and interpreted. Unlike physical artifacts that provide clues through structure and composition, texts offer direct communication from the past. The deliberate preservation of these scrolls suggests that their contents were considered important enough to protect across generations. This intention implies foresight, a recognition that the information might have value at a later time. The emergence of such materials during a period of heightened activity across multiple systems raises the possibility that timing plays a role beyond simple coincidence. At this stage, the pattern that has been developing across previous observations becomes more comprehensive. The atmosphere has shown variability through extreme weather and visual changes. The land has demonstrated instability through erosion and structural shifts. Sound has introduced an element that challenges current classification. Biological systems have exhibited coordinated behavior without clear triggers. Now, historical artifacts and preserved information are entering the sequence, expanding the pattern to include human history and recorded knowledge. This expansion is significant because it connects present conditions with past actions. The objects being uncovered were placed with intention, and their preservation required effort and planning. Their discovery creates a link between different points in time, bringing past decisions into the present moment. This connection reinforces the idea that the current pattern is not limited to immediate environmental conditions, but may involve a broader temporal context. The logical progression from physical changes to biological responses and now to historical revelations suggests that the scope of observation must continue to widen. Each category of event adds new information, and together they form a structure that is increasingly difficult to dismiss as unrelated occurrences. The sequence is not random. It follows a consistent expansion from one domain to another, maintaining continuity while introducing new elements. As this progression reaches its current stage, it becomes necessary to evaluate the pattern as a whole rather than focusing on individual components. Each event can be explained within its own context, but the combination of events creates a situation that requires a different approach. Patterns are recognized through repetition, timing, and interaction. All three elements are present in the current sequence. Repetition is evident in the increasing frequency of unusual events. Timing is demonstrated by their occurrence within overlapping periods. Interaction is suggested by the way different systems appear to respond in parallel. The conclusion that emerges from this evaluation is not based on speculation, but on observation. When multiple independent systems display changes at the same time, the probability of coincidence decreases. This does not eliminate the need for scientific explanation, but it does highlight the importance of considering relationships between events. The pattern itself becomes a form of data, providing insight into how different systems may be connected. At this point, the focus shifts from identifying individual phenomena to understanding their collective significance. The changes in the sky, the movement of the land, the behavior of living organisms, and the emergence of hidden objects all contribute to a single, unified pattern. This pattern is characterized by convergence, where different forms of change align within the same time frame. Convergence is important because it indicates that multiple variables are influencing the system simultaneously. In biblical descriptions, periods of convergence are often associated with transitions. These transitions are not described as random or chaotic, but as structured developments that unfold in stages. Each stage introduces new elements while maintaining continuity with previous ones. This structure is consistent with the sequence observed in the current situation. The events do not replace each other. They build upon one another, creating a cumulative effect. The key implication of this cumulative effect is that it demands attention. Ignoring individual events may be possible when they are rare or isolated. Ignoring a pattern that continues to grow becomes increasingly difficult. Recognition does not require agreement on interpretation. It requires acknowledgement that the pattern exists and that it is evolving. This leads to a set of direct questions that follow logically from the observations. If these events are connected, what is the nature of that connection? If the pattern is expanding, what direction is it taking? If the timing is significant, what does it indicate about the current moment? These questions are not rhetorical. They arise naturally from the data and the sequence of events. The appropriate response to such questions is not immediate conclusion, but careful consideration. Understanding develops over time through observation, analysis, and comparison. At the same time, awareness must be maintained. Patterns provide information, but only if they are recognized. Missing the pattern means missing the opportunity to understand what it represents. You are now looking at a sequence that includes environmental shifts, atmospheric anomalies, geological changes, biological coordination, and historical revelations. Each element has been observed, documented, and analyzed within its own field. Together, they form a structure that is coherent and continuous. This structure does not rely on interpretation to exist. It is present in the alignment of events. So the question is no longer whether each individual event can be explained. The question is whether the pattern formed by all of them can be ignored. Do you believe that all of these developments are occurring independently, without connection? Or do you recognize that their convergence may indicate something larger? If these signs carry meaning, how should that meaning be approached? What actions should follow from recognition? Take a moment to consider what has been presented. Not with fear, but with clarity. The purpose of observation is understanding, and understanding begins with attention. If there is a pattern, it is visible. If there is significance, it will become clearer through continued awareness. Now ask yourself directly, are you paying attention to what is happening around you? Are you prepared to recognize change when it becomes unmistakable? And if these events represent more than isolated incidents, what steps should be taken now rather than later? This is not a call to panic. It is a call to awareness. It is a call to remain grounded, to think clearly, and to consider the possibility that the moment you are living in carries more weight than it first appears. Take time to reflect. Take time to seek understanding. And if you believe in prayer, take time to pray for wisdom, for discernment, and for the ability to recognize what is unfolding before it reaches a point where recognition is no longer optional.